she's willing to drop it. Oh shoot, hey. Well,
Jessica, you made my heart drop.
oops. Dr. Myers, I have a question. Okay. I've been spoiled. Okay, so how are you doing?
I'm okay as we can be, right? How about you?
I'm well. I was just wondering, how badly do you want to grade? How many students are in this class?
19?
How badly do you want to grade 19 10-page papers?
Not, you know what? They actually won't take me that long to grade. Hang on just a sec. Hello? I thought it was spam, but I always have to check now that Quinn's at a new school, so. It will eventually write itself. Like, this sounds very daunting, but I swear to you, it's not. The people who have been in the internship class can attest to that, because this paper is really similar to that one.
I was just wondering, maybe we could exchange it since we're such a good class and we have such good dialogue for like, instead of like the paper, we just have like a giant dialogue. I just don't want to write. I don't want to look at my computer screen. If I'm being completely honest with you, I just finished a 20-page essay and I want to gouge my eyes out. I don't want to do any more writing.
Well, you do have a week and a half. It isn't due till next Friday. So you have plenty of time to rest your eyes.
Our banter is good enough for the paper.
In this class, yeah.
I do
We'll
enjoy
go
the
in for like
banter.
3 hours if you need us to.
But
So if it makes you feel better, I thought the paper was due today.
I thought it was too, but Sydney corrected me, and I appreciate that I actually have it elsewhere on the syllabus that it's due next Friday. So I'm giving
For
you
real. Sydney, thank you for that, because I would have died.
yeah. It was so funny because like when I was sending the email, I was like, maybe I should just change it to the exam day. Then I was like, no, I don't know. And then when Sydney emailed me, I was like, of course, I thought at the beginning of the semester I should change it. And then I just didn't. So I swear to you, this is not going to be as hard as you think it is, because it's about you, right? So it's really not going to take that long to write it. So I wrote I had 2 chapters of an ebook about teaching online. I had 0 of anything written when I started over Thanksgiving break, and I got them both done by Tuesday. And it was because I was writing mostly about me and my experiences, so it flowed a lot more quickly than if I was writing a research paper, right? So it's basically a giant reflection paper where you throw in some citations. So I think when you sit down to write it, it won't be as onerous as you think it is, I swear. Meg, see your hand up.
Yeah, I can agree to that statement, because I thought the paper was due today. So like I started writing it over break, and like I blew through like 4 pages just talking about myself.
Yep. I mean, you're just talking about yourself and throwing in some references. Like, it's really not going to be as bad as y'all think it is, I swear. And then the nice thing is, once you have your paper done, your presentation for next Friday is super easy, right? Because you're just presenting on what you wrote in the paper. Other questions about the paper or class? I'm really sorry about the no thing. I had no idea that this
Dr.
program
Myers?
was that clunky. Yeah, Colin, go ahead.
So for the, personal reflection paper, how are we supposed to put like scholarly sources in it?
So for example, if you're writing about what you want to do after you graduate, right? You can pull similar articles to what we talked about in class for that particular field. You can talk about, there's a whole literature out there about the teaching of psychology that shows how what you do in class relates to what you do later in life. So you could cite some of that if you needed to.
Gotcha.
To have 5 sources for the whole thing. So,
and we can use some of the articles we have read in class, right?
Exactly. Yep. So if we read 3 articles for that topic and you feel like they all relate, hey, you're 3/5 of the way done with your lit search.
Dr. Myers, I have a question. So for our group project, do we all need to like turn it in on Blackboard separately, or like what should we do for that?
Okay, so I printed out a sheet that's just the rubric from the syllabus. I'm just going to grade you that way, and I'll hand enter your group grades. And then the other thing you are going to do, and I have the link all ready to go, so let me copy it and stick it in the chat for you all, is you are going to rate your group members, including yourself. So this form that I just sent you, you're going to fill out one for each group member, including yourself. And then you'll get an average of that for your group member rating. Just because I'm not there when you guys are working as a group, right? So if someone really didn't hold their weight, I have no idea unless you tell me. So this is how I can reflect that. But I'm sure you are all awesome because you're awesome in general. So. All right. Other questions about logistics for the end of the semester? So unfortunately, we have one of the last exam slots. We're next Friday at 11:30, which sucks. But you know what? We'll just make the best of it. We will have guests because, again, this is our capstone now. Dr. Jackson, Dr. Barterell, and Dr. Ariel, I think you're going to take shifts and come in and watch presentations and rate them not for a grade, but just for how well have we done teaching you all to give presentations over the course of this. So in addition to me and your classmates, you'll also get to tell them about what you've been thinking about all semester. So it's basically for anyone who did 480, it's sort of like how we used to do ratings during 480 defenses, but much less scary because you're just talking about yourself. So I will be the one assigning the grades still. No one but me, you know, who's been working with you all semester will have any influence on that. It's just like the assessments you're taking for us. They're rating us. How well are we doing teaching you, essentially? I like that one group seems particularly happy. That's awesome. All right, is there any group in particular that's raring to go first? Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, spot.
Clearly not the best group, doesn't want to go first.
Oh, somebody said it.
Ouch.
We can go first. That's fine.
Okay.
We just have to figure out who in our group is going to present the thing. So give us a second. Maybe we're not the best then.
No, we decided that each person was going to present their section. So I think, I'm not sure.
I think she meant like who's going to share the presentation on the screen.
Oh.
But that's the case.
That's what I meant. Sorry.
Then what I'll do is I'll just go in the order that the groups were listed on the sheet, which I just put in the chat. So after the Culkins group will be the Hornite group, and then the Milgram group, then the Zimbardo group, and then the Tuskegee group. Exactly. Okay, cool. And if you all need me to like spotlight anyone or anything, just let me know. And I will turn it over to our first group.
Okay, Jessica said she's going to share, so I guess. Oh, here she goes.
All right, so we did a project defining a new ethics code for the VW psychology department. We as a department are committed to ensuring the safety and well-being of our participants, our researchers, and the students of our work. We are dedicated to our participants and our research and the light in which the university is represented. All our research directly shows back to the university and what we stand for. A VW researcher is an individual who respects the ambition, health, and well-being of our participants and our fellow researchers. We always will strive for honesty, diversity, dynamic inclusion, safety, and knowledge. In providing a code of ethics for the VWU researchers to follow, we aim to solidify the goals of the psychology department and of VWU research as a whole, and maintaining the protection and the welfare of groups and individuals with whom our researchers work, and educating ourselves, each other, and the community at large. I took this preamble and followed loosely the guidelines and the format of the APA preamble, as did a lot of our other our group members. We took a lot of hints from the APA ethics code as well as other ethics codes that we found to be particularly good.
And so for the purpose and the main function of our code is to provide an ethics code with proper principles and standards that offer guidance for the psychology department at Virginia Wesleyan University with conducting on-campus experiments, to show the importance of using proper ethics for researchers and participants when it comes to investigation and observation in a research setting, and as well as helping prepare and provide support to those who find themselves in situations that are potentially unethical and require further analysis. And I took this kind of from the APA website and our book, the Fisher book, and I also looked around and at different universities and what the purpose and function of their codes of ethics are about, and as well as even companies and corporations, like their code of ethics and what the function and purpose of theirs were, and came up with how, like, our purpose for our code.
Okay, so we have 4 ethical principles. Principle A, fair treatment of participants and fellow researchers. Researchers will adopt and place policies to ensure support of the rights and needs of all participants and fellow psychologists, regardless of race, religion, color, age, sex, including pregnancy, disability, veteran status, sexual orientation, national origin, and political affiliation. Researchers will maintain a standard of ethics aligned with the APA while conducting research that ensures fair treatment before, during, and after research experiments. Researchers will nurture a climate of care, concern, and civility towards participants and other psychologists. Principle B, good practice. Sorry for the lame names. It was really hard to figure out what to name these, so I apologize. Researchers will ensure that all research is carried out in a manner that the participants, school, and public can trust and support, and that the quality of such research allows it to contribute to improvements in the field of psychology. Researchers will ensure that the research done within the VWU Psychology Department is done in fair practice, and it's only done with the intention of gaining knowledge and improving the field of psychology and not for personal gain or any other unethical reasons. It is to be started and carried out in a professional manner that represents the university in a positive light. And then the 2 other ones, Principle C, researcher's responsibility. Whether student or professor, the researcher is always responsible for his or her own actions. Researchers will ensure that he or she is acting in a professional manner at all times before, during, and after research has been conducted. Researchers will ensure that at all times during research, student or professor will consider carefully the nature of the task they are asking participants to complete to allow the utmost ethical practice to be followed during research. This is to ensure both researcher and participant understand the task and recognize that they are fair. And Principle D, preventing or undoing harm. Researchers will not overstep any boundaries during a study that may cause distress to the participants. Researchers must ensure that participants feel the experience is a safe and private opportunity to explore thoughts and actions they may not normally share, and that their information remain private. While research is being conducted, it is important to consider the researcher will do in an event that an individual becomes distressed. If the participant seems to be in distress or uncomfortable, allow breaks and small tasks to not do any further harm. Researchers will ensure that all research done at the university will not do harm to participants, fellow researchers, or the campus community, but rather conduct research that is fair to all parties. And then I put, following these principles can allow for returning participants and good word of mouth for the department. And for these, I looked at local schools and their ethics codes. So I looked at like ODU, Hampton, NSU, and I also looked at obviously our APA guidelines and principles. And I looked at, I forget what the name of it is, but the ethics code that they have in England. I looked at that as well, just trying to compile what would be best for our department at Virginia Wesleyan.
All right, and as far as ethical standards, we have 3 sections. We chose to focus on research because that's something that the students at Virginia Wesleyan in psychology do often for 480. And also in the psychology club, we've discussed doing social experiments and stuff on campus. And along with those, we also have to follow these ethical standards and use an IRB and all of the things just for social experiments as well. So section 1 is research setting. I'm not going to read all of these because a lot of them do come from the APA, but I also used the Virginia Wesleyan website. I was able to find the social work department has an ethics code. So, and they use the national social work. So I also use theirs to kind of contribute to this. So for research setting, the institution approval and IRB review board approval is of utmost importance. It has to be done before anything gets started. And they will look to make sure there is an informed consent. Informed consent will include the purpose of research, option to withdraw, the possible benefits and consequences of participation, limits of confidentiality, what the incentives will be, and contact information so they can contact the researchers afterwards. And then there should be a debriefing, which required to provide to the participants so that they can have a further understanding of the research and receive support if they were impacted by the study. As well as if there is any need for the animals in experiments, researchers will take as much care for the animals as they will for the human participants. Section 2 is the human relations, boundaries of competence and maintaining competence. Researchers need to go into the experiment with full knowledge and of what they're researching and not try to work beyond their competence. Avoid harm, avoid unfair discrimination and harassment are definitely always important. We saw those in the APA standards. Avoidance of false or deceptive statements. So this is the speak, print, or publicize work should not be deceptive or false statements. Nor should researchers report false findings. Reporting any ethical violations and unfair discrimination against complainants and respondents. So it's important that researchers do not seek retaliation towards participants or other researchers if a ethics code violation is reported. Section 3 is record keeping. This is to make sure that the researchers properly document all their work and keep data collection research and their records limited so that nobody else has access, and misuse of researchers' work. So researchers will not misuse or misrepresent other work or their own. So this is when they're doing their research, they cannot manipulate the data so that it could say what they need it to say, and they also can't show the incorrect data. Maintaining confidentiality as well as use of confidential information for didactic or other purposes. So this is to ensure that researchers will maintain the confidentiality even after the experiment during the analysis and presenting findings. And I think that's all we got. So does anybody else have anything they want to add to it?
I do. We definitely make to focus this on research-based ethics, just because as an undergraduate institution, we are not practitioners, so we did not need to form an ethics code specific to individuals who are going to be practicing therapy or, psychiatry or things like that. We tried to format it to, research on the whole. And then we also found it extremely important to maintain ethical standards in an equal manner for both students and professors. They are each held to the same ethical principles. No amount of seniority will make anything any, quote unquote, easier for any researcher. Everyone is held to the same standard and priority. Does anyone have any questions for us? Or does
I was gonna say something and then I guess we can do questions. I was just gonna say that I think we really tried to look at like our local surrounding schools and seeing if they have like the same ethical code that we do or we would want for our department. And I found it really interesting that no, or at least I couldn't find a specific ethics code for a psychology department for any of the local schools that I looked at. So I think that we found it really important to create this code for our department, especially for research. I don't think this will ever get actually used, but I just thought it was really cool to at least make it and have an understanding of what we need to do as a department. And yeah. I guess if anyone has questions or other comments, feel free to ask.
Y'all did a great job. Y'all knew I had to say it. I'm proud of it. I love that.
Thank
I enjoyed every bit of it.
We're always looking for Charleston every time. I just had one quick question, then we'll move on to the next group.
Yeah, go ahead.
You didn't include anything about professor-student interaction or teaching.
Did you say why didn't we, or should?
It seems like you focus mostly on the research part. So, what about, if a professor is unethical?
I think that with the, I don't know, that's a good question. I feel like with the section where we added with anybody in the VWU community, included it, but because we did research, we didn't focus necessarily on the professor-student relationship.
Yeah, and a lot of the schools that I was researching for this, they have one ethics code for employees and then another ethics code for students. And I know we kind of combined this a little bit as a department, but I think if we were to actually like create something like an ethics code that would actually be put out, I would assume that there would be one for students and one for employees. So I think that's why we didn't include like specifics, but that's a good point. I think we may have, I'm not really sure, but at least that's my reasoning when I was looking. Like every school and even department wise have different codes for student and employees.
That's great. Yep. Just wanted to ask about it real quick. So yeah, Maria.
And furthermore, I do think that ideally, if it were implemented, it would definitely be a breathing document in that, version 1.0 is definitely probably full of things that we either overlooked or misrepresented in some way, shape, or form. And so different perspectives would definitely be included in later versions as, implementation were to occur. So things like your question would definitely be kind of thrown in there now that we kind of thought about, that's probably something we should have included, or at least included in specificity rather than just including the university community as a whole and like speaking out about professor-student relationships specifically.
Excellent answers. So kudos to our first group to go. You can always use the reactions at the bottom of the screen. They've expanded them now, so they're more fun. Alrighty, so next up we have Sarah, Zoe, and Kenzie.
Hello, everybody.
I know we did the ethical quandary. I think on the list it had us for ethics code. We chose the ethical quandary. Okay. So I actually got the inspiration from the professor. I don't know the guy's name, but the professor from Virginia Wesleyan University, who tweeted that post, and I was like, oh, inspiration. So I just tweaked it a little bit. So I basically made a scenario where a psychology professor at Virginia Wesleyan University posts on social media account about mental health issues. He believes that if a student uses that as an excuse in not getting work done, he will deduct from their grade. A student who genuinely likes the professor in his class finds this post and brings a screenshot to the professor with a complaint about sensitivity and unfairness. The professor knew this student well outside of campus and that she had a crush on him in the past, so he offers her a better grade to make it worth her while in exchange for her silence and to not make a big deal over the whole post because of his right to free speech. When she hesitates on deleting the screenshot, the professor gets angry and threatens to fail her and anyone else who complains. So that's the scenario.
We're going to look at what the ethical problem is here, and then the portion of the ethic codes, and then what they should have done differently. So for the first one, principle A is beneficence and non-maleficence, which is compassionate, humane, non-malevolent, and prudent. Hold on, I'm trying to zoom in. I can't really see it. So psychologists should be able to identify what is the best interest of those whom they work with and when a situation threatens welfare of individuals and the competence required to achieve the greatest good to avoid and minimize harm. And then principle B is fidelity and responsibility. And this is faithful, dependable, conscientious, and committed to professional growth. And this is when psychologists should be aware of their obligations to the individuals and communities that are affected by their work, including their responsibilities to the profession and obligations under the law.
And for principle C, D, and E is basically being honest. So C is integrity, honest, reliable, self-aware, and genuine. So psychologists know it's possible before making professional commitments and able to identify when is necessary to correct misconceptions or mistrust. Principle D for justice is psychologists should be able to identify individual or group vulnerabilities that lead to exploitation and recognize when the course of action would result in or has resulted in unfair or just practices. And last is E, respect for people's rights and dignity. So psychologists must be aware of special safeguards, especially to protect the autonomy, privacy, and dignity of members of the diverse populations with whom the psychologist works. So basically broke B, C, D, and E. This is just a summary of it. He broke the obligations of the community, so he let his personal opinions affect his work and his profession. He did not help with the misconceptions of mistrust. He didn't correct that. Identifying vulnerabilities leading to exploitation, which he did. He tried to use charm and manipulate his way out of it. And then also must recognize safeguards necessary to protect the members of the community. So the ethical problem here is when he posts on social media, he posted an insensitive comment and then just threatened a student over the opinion. So no matter what the freedom of speech is, if you're a high authority, you have to be careful on what you post and say and the consequences that follow. Oops, sorry. It's hard because I see the pictures of everyone's faces on the screen and I have to move it around to read the slides. And so he tried to use, to appeal to her good nature by using their past to win her silence. So in the ethics code, it was mostly just like 3.1 to 3.6 and like also 10.05. So unfair discrimination, sexual harassment, other harassment, avoiding harm, violation of other standards, conflict of interest, and then sexual intimacy with current therapy client patients. This one, I know he's not like a therapist, but it was something I thought that should have been included because he basically was using her and like the relationship past to manipulate and get what he wanted, which is not okay. And it impacts what his job and his communication with her.
So what should the professor have done differently? One, he should not post on social media about sensitive issues like mental health. And he should always keep negative comments to himself. If you don't have anything nice to say, he just shouldn't have said it at all. And second, the professor shouldn't have threatened a better grade for the student to remain silent about the post or became angry with the student. And then what should the student have done differently? She wants to make sure that there is unlawful discriminating taking place before taking the post to a higher authority. She should have showed a higher authority instead of a professor. If the school doesn't already have policies to protect people or have policies against social media posts with professors, she should ask to change their policies. And she should have been sure to tell an authority he threatened her or even like call 911 if necessary. And she wants to bring attention to the matter in a timely manner. So don't wait like 6 months or so before telling someone that that happened. And she could take legal action if needed. So she should have taken the post to a higher authority in the first place. There wouldn't have been an issue between the professor and the student if she did that. She may feel in harm's way now after he threatened her, therefore legal action may be needed. And she can always ask the school for a copy of the complaint procedure the university follows. And then what should the university do? Most universities already have policies and procedures they follow if something like this were to happen. So they should follow through with their policies or change them if they need to. And then they should always be supportive of the student. Any questions?
You guys did a great job. You did a great job. I was trying to give everybody a chance, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it. You did a great job.
I don't have any questions for you. I just wanted to say that Zoe, where you had 10.10 or whatever it was, you could use 7.07, which is the same thing, but for students. So you had the right idea, just the wrong number. So
I was getting nervous because I was like, I made it a scenario about a professor, and I was like, I wonder if I should change it to a psychologist so it like applies, because they had like patients.
no, it definitely applies. As I've told you all, this wouldn't be an issue for me. Like, no offense to anybody, you're all lovely people, but I just don't see you that way. But it is in the ethics code that it is not right for a professor to have any kind of relationship sexually with a student. So, yep.
And I guess if we made an ethics code, we can add that part of it to our department ethics code, definitely.
Awesome. Great job. Hooray. And next we have Charleston, Sydney, Greta, Sam, and Yami. And so someone's going to have to be Charleston for Charleston. Just putting that out there.
I'll be Charleston since my name starts with a C.
We'll all be Charleston for Charleston.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start the presentation. So I have, let me share the screen. We're doing the unfair discrimination and medically assisted suicide on our report. So I have Sydney, Greta, Sam, and Charleston with me. The first one is the unfair discrimination with implicit bias involved outside association outside consciousness awareness on the bias of irrelevant characters such as race or gender. Inequalities in healthcare are significant concern with a lot of like emphasis on the potential for unintentional implicit discrimination to play in this issue. So there have been knowledge expansion or studies, but there's a lot of observational studies that has been lagged behind. So the figure on my PowerPoint shows that the implicit bias between clinician and the patient and how that leads to the hypertension control or medical intensification. So the number of studies have shown that people with like more implicit ethnic or racial prejudice have a weaker interpersonal relationship with minorities and people, often in a very subtle ways. Medication intervention is an increased in number of drug classes prescribed in an increased dosage of at least medication or a switch to another medication that is prescribed by clinician with understanding in patients. I will go ahead and give it to Greta.
So when we were discussing what to do for our PowerPoint, we were trying to give like a story like scenario. So we got a lot of inspiration from Grey's Anatomy. So basically so we have 2 case studies and they're both going to take place in Grace Sloan Memorial Hospital, which is located, as you see on the map, in Seattle, Washington. So I hope this makes it more enjoyable to listen to our presentation. I think you went past a few slides. It should say case study 1. Yeah, there it is. So for our first case study, we kind of did a scenario where like the patient is at fault. So what should the medical, excuse me, so what should the medical professional do in the case where the patient's kind of ethically immoral? So I kind of wanted to relate this to what me and Charleston's class discussion from this past class was about. So intersectionality and like how it can relate to different studies like this. So basically a reminder, intersectionality is the overlap of various social identities, including race, gender, sexuality, and class, and how it contributes to the specific type of systematic oppression, discrimination experienced by an individual.
So we have like a little video for you guys of like the scene that we used as our inspiration for this first case that we wrote. I think Yami's gonna play it.
Oh, you might have to reshare and share your computer sound.
Yeah, you gotta, yeah.
I'm for shy. Now my hands may be smaller than a man. No. You have to let me examine you.
I can wait. I'll wait for a guy.
You're shy. Okay, I get that. This is no time for shy. Now my hands may be smaller than a man's, but my brain is much larger. I assure you now. You're just going to have to let me examine you.
No, do not touch me.
For the love.
Dr. Bailey, you have an emergent situation?
He says he wants a male doctor. He doesn't want my female hands touching.
Let me see his chart. Jane, I'm Dr. Weber. I'm going to palpate your abdomen.
No.
What you said he wanted a male doctor.
He did.
I want another. I want a different doctor. I'll wait for a different doctor.
A different doctor?
You mean you want a white doctor? I have paramedics hanging upside down. Can you handle this?
Yes, sir. I can. I only need one.
I'm sorry, I had to go back again.
It's all good. It's all good. Things happen.
I think I hit
It's
exit
okay.
without knowing it. Yeah.
No points off for tech issues. We all have.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my internet is a little bit slower. Sorry.
But yeah, so that was our video. We hope you enjoyed it. This was 100% the inspiration for case study 1. Greta, I think you are going to read it. Or
No, I got this. So we're going to go ahead and read the entire case study for you. So case study 1, patient A is admitted into a public hospital for severe body aches, chills, and shortness of breath. Dr. C enters the room and proceeds to prepare to assist patient A. Right when she attempts to help the patient states that he does not feel comfortable with her treating him and requests another doctor. Dr. C leaves the room, expresses the patient's request to the other doctors, and refuses to go back into his room. Excuse me. Dr. B enters the patient's room, and patient A still refuses care for her as well. From her as well. Dr. C and B return to the patient's room and explain that the hospital is short-staffed at the moment and that they are the only available doctors for him. Patient A is persistent in receiving care from a different doctor. So Dr. C and B retrieve their supervisor. The supervisor enters the patient's room and asks what the problem is. Patient A responds that he wishes not to receive care from doctors like them. Patient A is a white male, Dr. B is a Black female, and Dr. C is a white female. The supervisor is a white male. All the doctors in the room realized the matter at hand. The supervisor then asked patient A if his issue is with the doctor's race or gender. The supervisor then requested that patient A leave the hospital. Now, after reading that little whirlwind of a case study, our question for you is, what do you feel like the ethical issue here, what the ethical issue is here, and can you even apply any ethical standards to this? Ethical codes or standards to this. So this is where we want you to get involved, guys. Anybody, don't say it all at once.
If I had to guess, like, in reality, I don't know. If you're a doctor and you're like a person of color or whatever, I fully trust you guys to save my life because you're a doctor and I'm not. But I don't know if the patient, I think other than like the patient being either like racist or bad, like, I don't know if the doctor can do anything, maybe than complying with the patient's wishes. I don't know. I've never like had that experience. I've never seen that, but that's a really good, like, that really makes you think. I don't know.
And my question is the patient held to the same like level of ethical standards as the doctor or the hospital staff? Because obviously he's the one in the wrong here, but can you hold him to the same level of ethics as them? I don't really know.
I would argue off of Carly's statement that no, you cannot really hold a patient to the same ethical standards as, a practitioner, whether it be a psychologist, a doctor, what have you, because they are not educated in those ethical standards. They've not taken any sort of oath like practitioners generally have. And while he is wrong, I think that really the only, you can consider it kind of like, an autonomy sort of thing, where the patient exercises their autonomy in saying, I don't want to be treated by this kind of person or that kind of person. Similarly to how a patient might exercise their autonomy by saying, I don't want this sort of treatment or that sort of treatment. Does it make it right? Not necessarily, but it is their choice. And I do believe that really the only thing that they can do is either say, listen, this is the only doctor we have for you. Either, accept treatment from this doctor or find a different hospital,
And I think it's interesting that they asked him to leave, because like restaurants and stores, you can say, okay, we're refusing service, but I don't know if you can really refuse service in a medical situation like a hospital or a doctor's office, even when the patient is being completely racist and ridiculous.
I
So
know that in general practicing, you can fire your patient, so to speak. You can basically say, you know, as long as it's not an emergency scenario, you can say, I'm no longer comfortable, you know, providing care for you. Here are some recommendations I would, you know, give to you. I also know that therapists do that in the case where perhaps a, you know, a patient is, sorry, I was reading Jessica's comment. Where a patient is, you know, somehow inappropriate with the therapist, they can say, I'm not comfortable with this relationship. Here's some other therapists you could see. I will no longer be serving you. But I also think that in an emergency scenario, it has to be made exceptionally clear that, you know, if one of us does not serve you and help you and treat you, there is a chance you could die. Or, you know, and also I think the question is, where does the autonomy run out? Where does, you know, where can you say this person is in pain and is no longer able to make this decision for themselves? They do not understand the severity of their situation.
Thank y'all so much for your comments. We appreciate it. And I see a lot of different people said something in the chat, so but we got to move on to the next slide. Thank y'all for participating now. Go ahead, Greta.
So you all were very spot on, like from what we were thinking, that although the patient is not a very nice man, that the medical professional still has to be held at an ethical higher power, however you want to say it. So basically the ethical issue is the supervisor asked the patient to leave without treatment or a means of providing treatment in any other way despite the patient's discriminatory behavior. So basically what Miranda was saying is that since we asked the patient, or since the supervisor asked the patient to leave, we still needed, well, the patient or the doctor, sorry, still needed to find like some means of like providing this patient with some type of treatment or a means of receiving treatment.
So here is the standard we end up coming to: avoiding harm. Psychologists take reasonable steps to avoid harming their clients/patients, students, supervisees, research participants, organizational clients, and others with whom they work, and to minimize harm where it is foreseeable and avoidable. And of course, we all like, I'll let you read the other one. And the reason we went with avoiding harm was because, like someone said, I think it was Carly that brought up the point of, asking him to leave the hospital. And somebody also said in the chat, referring to, if he requests that he wants to wait, then he can wait. And like Dr. Myers just said, doctors have a duty to care. So if he's willing to, if that may take a day or two, and he's willing to sit there and, to get the doctor that he wants, then he really kind of has every right, though like we said, we can't hold him to the ethical standard that doctors are at in our ethical code. He still has, his own rights to still, we owe it to him to give him care. We owe it to him to take care of this patient, despite our disagreements with his, doctrine or his, ethical outlook. So we went with avoiding harm because there are some different routes he could have taken the doctors could have taken versus just asking him to leave, which we discuss in the next slide.
Yeah, so to backtrack a little bit too, keep in mind that this was also a public hospital, not a private hospital. I know that those lines are a little different as well. So in a public hospital, they have to treat the person definitely no matter what. Like, nobody agrees with his views, but it just is what it is. So we said what could have been done differently was that he could have set up like an ambulance to take him to another hospital or to receive treatment if he needed it. Like if he was really adamant about not receiving care from those doctors, or he could have moved some doctors around, maybe had a new doctor go treat somebody else and just switch him around a little bit. Or finally, the supervisor himself could have seen him and treated him, since he was already there and the patient is white. So I'm sure the white male doctor would have been fine. But the supervisor just seemed to just, want to get rid of him. So, yeah.
Okay, so in the second case study, we looked at clinical psychology through the perspective of medically assisted suicide, focusing more on the practitioner being at fault. And so on the next slide, just to give you a little bit of background, medically assisted suicide is legal only in California, Colorado, DC, Hawaii, Montana, Maine, New Jersey, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. For the purpose of our scenario, we place the setting in the state of Washington. And so the table kind of outlines the legal requirements of assisting with medical suicide in the states of Oregon and Washington. So just to outline a few of those things, the attending physician has to make sure that the patient with the terminal illness is at least 18, excuse me, a resident of Oregon or Washington, that they have made 1 written and 2 oral requests separated by 15 days. They understand the alternative options. They're assessed by a consulting physician, and the information about the patient and their condition is reported to the State Department of Human Services. Both the attending and consulting physicians have to ensure that, oh, wow, excuse me, y'all, that the patient is capable of making healthcare decisions, that with their terminal illness, they would die within the next 6 months. And if any concern arises about any psychological disorders that may be impairing the patient's judgment, they're referred to a psychologist or psychiatrist. And so the video we're about to play is a clip to give you a closer look at some of the factors that influence an individual's decision to seek medically assisted suicide. This particular case is one from Europe, but still follows the basic concepts we just discussed. So you can go ahead and play that.
An apartment block in a suburb of Zurich. Craig Ewert has come here to die. This functional flat is home to Dignitas, the controversial Swiss organization that has helped more than 800 people commit suicide. For the first time, it's allowed in cameras to film a death Craig believes is the release from the motor neurone disease that's rapidly paralyzing his body.
I haven't brushed your back for a long time with that brush, have I?
At home in Harrogate, he increasingly relied on his wife, Mary.
If I go through with it, I die, as I must at some point. If I don't go through with it, my choice is essentially to suffer and to inflict suffering on my family. And then die. Possibly in a way that is considerably more stressful and painful.
And just to jump in real quick, y'all have about 3 minutes to wrap up so we can make sure each of the other groups get 10 minutes each.
Okay, I'm gonna read the case study real quick. So patient A is a 32-year-old female who presented as a chronic smoker and was recently diagnosed with a metastatic stage 4 lung cancer. At her last appointment with her cancer specialist, she received a deteriorating prognosis. After lengthy consideration, patient A has decided to seek a physician assistance death, also known as medically assisted suicide. She has checked into her hospital in Washington where medically assisted suicide are legal. Thus far, she has been assisted by a primary and consulting physician as required by law and provided a written and 2 oral requests 15 days apart requesting medically assisted suicide. The physicians are seeking a psychiatric evaluation to ensure other factors are not impairing patients' A's decision-making abilities and comparison of the choice she's making in light of other alternative. The psychiatrist to perform the evaluation is making in light of other alternative. The psychiatrist to perform the evaluation of Catholic faith, and upon realization the reason for the evaluation has refused to do so because the Catholic faith does not condone or allow for any type of participation into euthanasia or assisted suicide. The psychiatric evaluation is the last step needed in moving forward with the patient's a request, but the psychiatrist continues to withhold any assistance. So we don't have time, so I'm gonna go ahead and talk about what could have been done. What could have been done with the ethical issue. So the imposing personal values on client is a type of boundary violation that can interfere with your client's progress in treatment as well as their right to self-determination. So if personal values interfere too severely with the ability to perform the evaluation, so the psychiatrist could find someone to perform the physical another psych eval. So the psychiatrist personal beliefs and values are interfering with the abilities to perform personal responsibilities required in the workplace.
All right, unfortunately, I gotta cut y'all off there, but you did great. Great job. Oh,
good job, group.
Good job, guys.
Great job, you guys.
Great job to my group. I just want to say that everybody did a great job and did your part. See you. I didn't see that coming, did you?
And Yami,
all right,
are you still in Dubai? If you are, I feel like you should get extra points for being in a different time zone, just like Mallory.
Yeah, we got 2 international people because Mallory's here today too. So we got Mallory from Australia too.
Welcome,
so,
Mallory.
Big Yami and Mallory. All
But
right.
what time it is in the chat?
Yeah, I'm 9 hours ahead.
9 hours ahead. Woo. All right, so Lane, Megan, and CJ are next.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself to share my screen. Okay, so our project, our Psych 495 Ethics and Action Project, I'm Megan.
CJ.
I'm Lane.
So for our presentation, we chose an ethical quandary, and CJ, take it away.
So our ethical quandary is, we created one. Dr. Mickey Mouse, an experimental psychologist, and his team conducted an experiment to see how much sleep a mouse has. Will it affect their sleep retention, like memory? Will their sleep affect their memory retention? So the control group that will sleep for 14 hours is the amount of mice, what they usually sleep, will have the fastest time completing the maze and the fewest amount of incorrect turns. The group that gets the shortest amount of sleep will have the slowest performance time and will have the highest amount of incorrect turns. Sleep deprivation will affect the mouse's speed performance and memory retention.
Okay, so here we have our subjects, which we used, Dr. Mickey Mouse used 80 mice that were separated into 8 groups, making it 10 mice per group. And then the equipment that he used was the cages that the mice slept in and were kept in, 10 multiple T mazes that the mice completed, sorry, cheese that they found at the end of the maze, blinking Christmas lights that were placed in the rooms to keep them awake, and stopwatches and spreadsheets to record their time and incorrect turns.
So the procedure that was used was that the research team separated the 80 mice into 8 groups of 10, and they had to do a control test where each group took a turn completing the maze after a full 14 hours of sleep. And in the morning, each group was placed into a different room where they slept for the day. The control group slept for 14 hours, which are the number of hours that mice are supposed to sleep each night. And the 7 other experimental groups received a reduced number of hours of sleep, from 12 hours to 0 hours of sleep. To keep them awake, they used blinking Christmas lights that were placed in the room, and every hour, a member of the research team gently shook the cages and changed the temperature of the room to keep them awake. After a full 24 hours have passed, each group had to complete the maze and find another piece of cheese, and they recorded how long it took them to complete the maze after this loss of sleep, as well as the number of incorrect turns.
So some of the codes violated, obviously, was 8.09b, where psychologists trained in research methods experienced in the care of laboratory animals supervise all procedures involving animals, are responsible for ensuring appropriate consideration of their comfort, health, and humane treatment. This code was violated because during the process of keeping animals awake as a part of the experiment, the mice were left unsupervised for a majority of time. The only time they were checked on was once every hour, and that was to change the temperature and make sure they're still awake or re-wake them up. The comfort and health of the mice were not considered in regards to the experiment by forcing mice to go to sleep, which is considered cruel and inhumane.
So the next code that was violated was Ethics Code 8.09D, which states psychologists make reasonable efforts to minimize the discomfort, infection, illness, and pain of animal subjects. So this code was violated because the mice were forced into rooms with blinking lights the entire time that they were forced to be kept awake, which caused discomfort. And then also that the mice were put into discomfort whenever a researcher shook their cage throughout the night for being kept awake for extended periods of time.
The third section of this ethics code that was violated was Ethics Code 8.09 Section E, and it states that psychologists, they are allowed to do a procedure that can cause animals pain or stress only when an alternative procedure is unavailable and their goal is justified by scientific and educational reasons. This ethics code was violated because this experiment is causing pain to the animals and stress throughout the procedure, and they could have used alternative ways to do that during the experiment, which we'll see in the next slide. And as we said before, it caused them stress and anxiety and pain by them being forced to be awake for a very long time, exposed to flashing lights, which can make them irritated, and change in temperatures, as well as their cages being shaken. So to continue on with this, there have been other studies that have been done to see how the loss of sleep affects the memory in rodents, such as a study that was done in 2013 that was published in the Frontiers in Systems Neuroscience. And the study found that the sleep deprivation caused the mice to have poor spatial memory retention. When the mice received sleep recovery, so when they were able to sleep for a certain number of hours, their performance in the maze improved. And it showed that sleep allows mice to recall information later on, whereas opposed to no sleep will cause them not to remember the patterns of the maze and complete it in an efficient amount of time. And so multiple studies have been done on sleep deprivation, how it affects a mouse's memory. That this being one of them, we found various others. And that means that Dr. Mouse's team have less justification for causing harm to these mice for research purposes because there have been so many other studies that show the same conclusions that he was trying to find. Also, in this study that I mentioned, they only had the mice lose about 30 to 3 hours of sleep instead of extreme measures like 12 and 14 hours. And Dr. Mouse's team could have done the same in this experiment.
We did some research and we came across the Animal Welfare Act, and it was amended in 1985 under the Food Security Act to protect animals that are used in research testing. It protects animals from harm during experiments and is applied to all experiments that use animals. Procedures must meet regulations of this Animal Welfare Act before being conducted, and they must be ran by a board, I believe.
So continuing on, a person is appointed to help the animals in case they're being mistreated. A person is appointed to alert the head of the research team and authorities, if need be, if the experiment is going wrong. Animals must be kept in an environment of good welfare with adequate ventilation, housing, food, water, sanitation, and shelter from extreme weather and temperatures. The research team violated this act by not having someone in charge of notifying the research team about the poor treatment of the mice. They also violated this act by not protecting them from extreme temperatures, and they were not provided proper housing since they were kept in a room with flashing lights and their cages were shaken often. Also, the fact that they were kept awake goes against some of these too.
So in conclusion, Dr. Mickey Mouse and his team violated the APA's ethics code as well as the Animal Welfare Act. What they could have done differently was have the mice only lose 30 minutes to 3 hours of sleep as opposed to 2 to 14 hours, because that would be considered inhumane, especially if we forced humans to do that as well for experiments. They also could have kept lights on to keep them awake and wake them by using soft noises as opposed to blinking lights, which can cause more irritation. Like I get chronic migraines all the time, and one thing that can trigger them is blinking lights. And by doing this differently, the mice still would have lost some sleep, and the researchers would still have seen how the loss of sleep affects their memory retention. Also, the living conditions of the shaken cages, flashing lights, and extreme temperatures cause stress to the mice along with the lack of sleep, which violates the APA's ethics code as well as the Animal Welfare Act. Thank you.
Great job.
Good job, guys.
Yay.
Is there any questions anyone has?
Unfortunately, I gave too much time at the beginning, so we'll just jump right into Colin and Mallory and Kira.
You did a great job, though. We're not gonna miss that. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna be the one sharing the screen. This time we're gonna not have problems. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, cool. So, us three, we're gonna be doing the Tuskegee experiment. I know that everybody's, we've basically all been in a lot of the same classes. We know about the Tuskegee experiment and everything that goes along with it, but we're gonna go over some of this ethical parts of it. So what is the Tuskegee experiment? We're just gonna go over some of the background of it. So the Tuskegee experiment was also known as the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, which, as we all know, is an unethical medical study on African-American men with syphilis. The study was conducted by the United States Public Health Service and Center for Disease Control and Prevention in conjunction with the Tuskegee University. The study was started in 1932 and it went on to go on for 40 years. So it ended in 1972 when the public got wind of the study. And of course, naturally, there was a major outcry. Originally, the study was to see the progression of untreated syphilis and to study it, but the participants weren't given the right research, like the beginning caveat stuff that we all know and have learned repeatedly in our psych classes, which are like informed consent, the ability to withdraw, participation, reducing harm, and other unethical practices. And actually, by the end of the study in 1972, there were only 74 participants still alive.
Okay, so we just want to include an explanation video from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. This was at a conference where they were discussing medical ethics, so we thought it was pretty relevant.
Let me say a little bit more about the Tuskegee syphilis study because it's a particularly historically important example of unethical research. So the Tuskegee syphilis study has, in fact, was the longest running study ever funded by the U.S. Public Health Service. It might surprise you to know that it ran for over 40 years. And it was only a result of a publication of a series of articles in the Washington Post in 1972 that brought public attention to ethical concerns in this study. The study involved observing the natural history of untreated syphilis in approximately 400 African American males. Why someone would want to observe syphilis to see what happens untreated is I think, hard for us to understand. But looking back to the time in which the study was originated in the early 30s, available treatments at that time, namely arsenic-based drugs, were toxic. They weren't universally available. And there was a view, perhaps only a minority view in the scientific community at that time, that syphilis might be less harmful in this community. Of course, that turned out to be false. The concerns ethically with this study were many. Obviously, the fact that syphilis was left untreated was a concern. It was a concern, in fact, at the beginning of the study because arsenic-based drugs were available at that time. It was an obvious concern when safe and highly effective treatment in the form of penicillin became available in the late 1940s and early 1950s in the United States. Through to the end of this study in 1972, people with syphilis in this study were not treated. In fact, steps were taken to prevent them being treated. A number of people in this community were in the Army at the time of the Second World War and after, and letters instructing Army physicians to not treat them for their syphilis were inserted in their service records. Furthermore, they were told that non-therapeutic procedures were in fact, quote unquote, special treatments. I'm not sure how well this is projecting. This is actually a sort of a consent form from the study. And I can just read the relevant bit here. I can read it. It says, "Dear sir, some time ago you were given a thorough examination. And since that time, we hope you have gotten a great deal of treatment for bad blood. You will now be given your last chance to get a second examination. This examination is a very special one. And after it is finished, you will be given a special treatment if it is believed you are in a condition to stand it." And some details about where to show up for this. And then in sort of capital letters at the end, remember, this is your last chance for special free treatment. be sure to meet the nurse. So that's an actual historical document that was distributed in this community. What's the special treatment? Well, here it is. It was a lumbar puncture to test for the presence of neurosyphilis, and this lumbar puncture in no way directed treatment. It was entirely for scientific purposes. Well, when this news of this study was finally aired in 1972 in the papers, it created a very considerable scandal, the ripples of which continue to have an impact on the trust that the African American community has in publicly funded research in the United States.
Would love to see it.
So next are just like some basic facts, which he actually went over a lot of them, but I thought it was important to include that the men in the study that had syphilis actually had latent syphilis. So that means they didn't have any symptoms, which is how a lot of them didn't actually recognize that they had syphilis in the first place. The incentive for the entire study was this free treatment that he mentioned, and the picture here is actually a nurse writing on a vial of blood that was taken from a member in the study. And the reason that Tuskegee was chosen was because they had the highest rate of syphilis in the country at the time.
Okay. So the study was intended to only last half of a year, but it wound up lasting 40, which is ethically questionable, seeing as how the men had not been properly informed to consent or told the purpose of the study in the first place. Black men were intentionally left without treatment for years, even after the development of penicillin to treat the syphilis. And when penicillin became the treatment for syphilis, the U.S. Health Service argued that never again would they find such a group of untreated individuals as the reason for withholding it from the men. The black men had not been given proper information to give consent to the 6 months they agreed upon, let alone the 40 years that the study actually lasted. The Public Health Service did give the men placebos and ineffective treatments for their bad blood, which was the leading cause of death in the Southern African American male. And due to the lack of treatment, 40 of the participants' wives actually contracted the disease, while 19 of the children were born with congenital syphilis. And that's just a picture of the penicillin that could have been used. And there was no formal apology until 1997, which is, kind of recent.
So for the ethical standard violations, first one, we have conflicts between ethics and organizational demands. As we said, Kira said, the doctors didn't follow really any ethical guidelines. They weren't treating their patients. They were causing harm. They were violating their own Hippocratic oath, even long after penicillin had been discovered. Reporting ethical violations, it was supposed to go, first of all, it was supposed to go on for 6 months, went on for 40 years. And they just tried to keep it quiet as long as they could and get as much information as they could and not say anything. Unfair discrimination, obviously, they only tested on African Americans. They also only tested on African American men. We tried to figure out maybe why that was, but couldn't find really anything that I could think of unless we did. Avoiding harm, they did the opposite. They were harming these people. They were harming their children. They were harming their grandchildren, and ended up harming a lot of people's trust.
So for the next ones, we had advertising and other public statements, which obviously you can't be deceptive to participants about the purpose and the duration of the study, both of which they were. The ad originally said that they were giving treatment for bad blood. This here isn't just an example of it. research and publication, informed consent to research. We clearly know that didn't happen. Deception in research, also very evident in pretty much every fact you can find about the study. And debriefing, most of them weren't actually alive to receive debriefing at the end of the study, which is terrible. But yeah, so a lot of ethical violations. And then for the principal violations, we also found that it violated every principle. Obviously not causing harm. They perpetuated harm in not only the men who participated in the study, but the community. There was a total lack of responsibility. They targeted minorities in the study intake. They also let these people spread syphilis throughout the community and didn't give any public notices. Integrity, the people who worked for the study either were silenced when they tried to put out their notice that there was clear ethical violations, or they didn't say anything and they acted without integrity throughout the entire study.
So for Principal D, Justice, they were exploiting these people. They were taking them for granted for as long as they could, and they did it for 40 years. And said they were going to give them treatment, and they just gave them a lumbar puncture, which is in treatment into test. Respect persons' rights and dignity. There were no respect for these people at all. They're basically just human guinea pigs. And even after they had already figured out how to treat it and how to cure it, they still decided they needed to keep testing on these men for decades. The only good thing they did maybe was keep the people's identity secret, but so many of them are also already dead. And this image is from the National Archives of a blood test being drawn.
Okay, now obviously, we all know the regulations and everything that we have to go through in order to get a study approved and everything like that, before, and things that people need to know before you can use them as a participant. So the Tuskegee experiment actually had a lot to do with that. In 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law, which created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, which eventually evolved into the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. So those 2 years after the whole Tuskegee experiment, there were regulations passed that now requires that it has to be voluntary, but it requires voluntary informed consent from all persons taking part in the study. And then lastly, all the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare funded studies that used human subjects were required to get their IRB reviewed and approved, which, I mean, if anybody's taken research methods, y'all have done one.
So, as we
I'm
said,
sorry, I'm gonna cut you guys off just because, again, we've gone over a little bit, and you all did great, and you've already got your full score from me, so great job. Thank you again to Mallory and Gabby for being here. Hooray!
Bleep Mallory.
Please email me with any questions that you have about the individual presentations or the paper. And I will see, I know some of you I'll see between now and then because I have you in other classes, but otherwise I'll see you next Friday at 11:30 right here.
Y'all
on
did a
this
great
Zoom.
job. Y'all did a really good job. Thank you for choosing that topic too. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Charleston,
Good job, everybody.
Good job, everyone. Bye.
Dr. Myers, I got a question. Will we